Hey, today I want to tell you about the bizarre tale of super people. Nope, not them. Close, but not them either. Yes, that's the one. The plot to this has more twists and turns than all 8 series of Game of Thrones, and I'd like to take you through them all, right up until this week where I've been taking part in a closed beta test. I'll tell you all about my experience from sinking in the hours there as a complete noob to Super People, how the game plays, and if this free-to-play Battle Royale is something you might want to try in the future when it releases. Or releases again, should I say. We'll get into that. Super People is developed by a new South Korean game studio called Wonder People. The public first got their hands on this game back in 2022 with the original closed beta test. Stick with me, I told you this would get weird. So the beta playtest is where you invite a limited number of players to test your game for you when it's in late development and you want to iron out any final wrinkles before going to full launch. That was in February. The game was a super soldier themed battle royale that took strong influence from PUBG. Harsh time to kill, tactical style, tricky weapons and superpower buffs thrown in, with about 45 players fighting to be the last survivor. The game then went into early release 8 months later in October of the same year. Now, early release is a bit of a funny one, and unless you're counting Battlefield 2042's shocker of a launch, you technically won't have experienced early release games on console. It's a PC thing. It's where a game is maybe 98% complete, but they release it early, admitting it's not quite finished, but they promise to catch up the last 2%. It can be a bit of a win-win. The players get to play the game early and influence the last bits of game design and final tweaks, and the studio can start generating a bit of money to finish the development and pay for the staff and servers. All that kind of jazz. And here's where we had our first plot twist. The game had undergone so much change following beta testing and early access that the developers wanted to retitle it as Super People 2. A bit of an odd choice, you might think, considering Super People 1 had never had a full official release, but this is possibly a symptom of Wonder People being a brand new game studio that still to this day is yet to release any other games. Now, it's all well and good putting a new title on something and pretending all problems have gone away, but that is only what can be described as burying your head in the sand. Players and content creators repeatedly shared concerns with the developers around an array of issues in the game that they thought needed improvement to allow the game to thrive. These things might sound familiar to Warzone players, but cheating, balance changes to OP weapons and characters, mismanagement at the store and Battle Pass were some of the biggies. Big money tournaments and sponsored streams, which were part of the initial marketing, all dried up. And a combination of this, along with the failure to make widely requested improvements to the game, meant that players started leaving. And they didn't stop. The player count continued to drop, which makes queue times and matchmaking worse, especially in large player number game modes like Battle Royale. And at that point, games just start to implode, like a reverse snowball effect. And so, even for a free-to-play, the game needs players to engage with the Battle Pass and the store purchases to support the game. With the trajectory of Super People only going one way, the studio pulled the plug. With less than a year since its early release, the game was discontinued on Steam and the servers were shut down. Absolute disaster. But how are we here now with me saying I've been taking part in yet another closed test beta? Well, from the ashes of the apocalypse, we had a glimmer of hope. Behind closed doors, the studio weren't ready to give up completely on their baby. They'd been working away to make changes and improve the experience of Super People 2. Super People 3? I'm just going to call it Super People. And so they recently announced they were relaunching the game soon, starting with this final playtest. Now, lots of the original player base were sad to see it go. They may have been unhappy with some of the development choices that led to its early demise, but at its core, Super People was a really good game with a lot of potential. And so the fans started salivating about what a return might look like, and as a total noob, I jumped in with all the old sweats and experienced firsthand what Super People now has to offer. Ready for another plot twist? Okay, so I said the game was a PvP superhero-based BR, which was visually and mechanically similar to PUBG. Now, according to the original fans, all the developers needed to do was implement those original balances and tweaks they'd been asking for, and they'd all come running back to the game they'd once loved. What did the game studio actually do? Well, obviously they added a load of AI monsters and zombies into the game. What was player versus player is now player versus experience, or PvPvE. And you know what? As a complete noob to the game, someone that never played it before and isn't hard stuck on the original experience because I didn't get a taste of that, I'm not dead against it. Whoa, 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 whoa. Step away from that keyboard and calm down, OG fans. Before any of you familiar with the game come at me with pitchforks in the comments, let me talk about my actual experience of the playtest. Because the twists and turns of this game have not reached a conclusion and there are still ups and downs to navigate. So how does the game play now? What are the core mechanics? After selecting your character in the start menu, you drop in with about 50 other players into what is just one map so far in a playtest. Which character you have selected determines your ultimate ability and which superpowers you can accumulate as the game goes on. You can see here there is a whole bunch and you get one at random off the rip. The others will randomly turn on as you gain XP in-game from killing stuff, surviving circles, or consuming super pills that you may stumble across when looting. Oh, it's a BR, so there is some unexplained ice circle at the edges of the map that gets smaller and smaller, serving to deliver that part of the game. Why you're on this island, why there is an ice circle, and why there are a load of monsters there, it's not abundantly clear. In fact, I have no idea whatsoever. There is a basic tutorial, two in fact. One for movement, and then after several games of you getting absolutely whooped by everybody else, you have another tutorial on crafting. By this point, it was a bit of a slap in the face though, to go, oh, and here's how you do this part of the game, but I was so grateful to just get some help with what the heck I was supposed to be doing, I forgot to get annoyed. So, I mentioned the looting, this is the usual thing. Box standard floor loot, rarer boxes and crates, and then also the bodies of people and monsters. Killing base level zombies with your knife drops common crafting items and some sort of rubbish gun that will just about get you going. The gun will shoot just a handful of marshmallows with wildly uncontrollable recoil before your mag is empty, so you will need to level up your gun in-game if you want to wield something that's more effective than shouting harsh language at your opponents. In fact, shouting harsh language at your opponents isn't even an option here, not because of an overly protective chat nanny, but because unfortunately there is no prox chat. So on a plus side, while this means you won't have to listen to the sound of some 13-year-old's poor quality hip-hop playing obnoxiously loud, or children crying in the background obnoxiously loud, it also means you can't have a debate with some random dude from Delaware about who may or may not be cheating. Cheats! Cheats, cheats, cheats. Yeah, I've got no idea. No idea. When you die, you have a really good option to view enemies POV or spectate them, though it currently seems to be you can only do one or the other at the minute. This, in theory, should make for a fantastic way of helping detect cheaters in addition to any baked-in anti-cheat. However, the kill cams and spectator cams are astonishingly inaccurate. Either that or literally every single player I watched was cheating. Pretty much none of the shots and hit markers match where you're watching on screen, and players often get insta-deleted. Insta-deleted. Frustratingly, another unusable super thing they've got in Super People is a cheating clip review function. The Jura. I presume you'd see this in action after a full release with more players playing, but it looks like you'll be able to log in here and make your own human judgment on whether submitted reports are legit or not. You build up a judgment trust score, depending on how well you judge clips, and so in addition to getting players fairly banned, or clearing the names of innocents, you'll also earn yourself in-game rewards, which I think is really cool. Only without the cams working properly, this is rendered completely useless. And there is no way I could have made any judgment on a single time I died. Which leads me onto my next point. I died a lot. I've said I'm a noob, I've never played PUBG, I've never played Super People 1 or 2 or had any experience of the game before. But I was getting stomped on. A lot. A lot. Now, generally I can shoot guns in games to a reasonable standard, so I put how much I and other new players will get stomped on down to two main points. One is that there is clearly a weapon and levelling meta. Now, there's a shooting range you can use to test all the guns and equipment and hundreds of attachment combinations, but I suspect within a matter of days of release, everyone will just be looking up YouTube videos on best meta weapon builds. Yay! When I paid attention to folks that killed me, there were already a couple of familiar loadouts that kept cropping up, so I think there's already signs that they could do more work with weapon balancing. In addition, the tutorials need to be way better. I am a staunch opponent of skill-based matchmaking, so I'd have to be some special kind of bold hypocrite to sit here and say I'm not okay with taking a bit of a beating while I learn to get better at a game. But I simply didn't know how the stuff worked initially. I I still don't really know how, when I made it to endgame, almost every person that killed me would have Special Forces grade maxed out kit, despite the fact I would spend all game looting like the dedicated loot goblin I am. I would only achieve mid-level kit. Even if I got first shots on my enemy, I would only lightly pepper them. They then laugh in my face and obliterate me, seemingly instantly. Fast, unavoidable deaths are part of the kit meta, but they are also partly down to point 2. Remember I said there was a point 2? The second point is that the network connectivity felt janky in places. Now, I've been back in, and after testing again, with all my graphics reduced to mashed potato mode, things definitely seem better. Quite a lot better, but I would say the game was struggling with optimisation and performance a bit. Frustratingly, this is only at key moments of action. I'm running a decent enough PC, and the game recommended I have all the graphics settings cranked up to 11. And while it looked really nice, and outside of fighting players, this made for a pretty environment, I found I did have to turn settings down considerably for gunfights against human players to feel better connected. Smoother. You'd still get obliterated in the blink of an eye, but the game would less often stutter through that blink to find yourself dead and without any hint of what had actually happened until you watch the kill cam. I'm not even joking, that was happening quite regularly. Sadly, an area that really didn't match the reasonable graphics is the audio. I think the audio stinks, quite frankly. The occlusion where buildings and objects should muffle sounds seems to be non-existent, so you'll hear shooting as two enemies engage in a gunfight, but without looking and spotting where it's coming from, it's really hard to tell if it's 50 or 500 metres away. And in a game where there's a certain style of player that loves to be sneaky, lurk and creep up on folks, I think decent sound is pretty important. I can see why people like this game. Even if the old school fans aren't happy about the monsters being added, they get really angry about it on social media. But I've enjoyed myself. It's always fun to try something new, and in a genre such as Battle Royale, where it's so hard for something to stand out, I think Super People does a really good job, and they deserve a pat on the back for that. But it is not guaranteed success for this title. It's free to play, but so far there are no details on a console launch, so it's looking like PC only. For now at least. That's one thing. Another is how do they manage some of the changes and evolutions needed to keep the game interesting. There's always things like ranked play and new maps, but all that is a bit of an unknown at the moment. I certainly think things that would need to be immediately in place for launch are really dialing in the character abilities and weapon balancing. This thing will get stale quicker than an organic loaf of bread if you're forced into using the same one or two characters or guns and nothing else. Essentially removing any room for personal expression or variety. At that point, it stops being fun and simply feels like work. And if you want that kind of experience, you can go and play Ranked Call of Duty. And then we also touched on cheating. The devs admitted in the old iteration of the game that cheating existed, even if dodgy kill cams led to false reporting at times, but it just goes without saying that any free-to-play title will always encounter extra risk of cheaters. Without having a money barrier to entry, any no-lifer bozo wanting to cheat can just rinse and repeat on new accounts after getting banned. There are steps developers can take, but that's for another time in another video. Overall, it's been really interesting to learn about where Super People came from to get here, and in some ways, anyone getting into the game at this point is at an advantage that you've missed out on all the dramas. Instead, you can hopefully soon give this unique title a whiz for free and see what you think of it yourself. Perhaps recently you have a bit of free gaming time that you didn't used to if you're one of the loyal players Activision has been trying to force out of Call of Duty Warzone. If you're interested to know how and why they would be doing something that sounds so dodgy, you can hear more about that in this video.